Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Aragon. So with module 24 we have a new artifact set which has got the Assassin's Dice. We can see the full set in the collections there, and all you need to do to obtain it is to do some big heroic encounters within the new zone. We'll go over that in a short bit, but we currently have all three pieces of the set as you can see here. So let's get them equipped, and you can see we have the Assassin's Choker, which has your 6 constitution on it, plus some offensive stats there, and then you have the Assassin's Belt with 3 dex and 3 charisma, with then just some defensive stats. And then we have the artifact, which we can see as the Assassin's Dice themselves. Now, having it on green just there will complete the full set, as you can see, giving us Uncanny Luck. Now, this set, Uncanny Luck, is nice and reliable, yes, giving 1.5% crit strike and 1.5% critical avoidance, but that is like minuscule compared to, let's say, running with the Alacrity set from Dragon Hunts, which would give us up to 7.5% stats versus just 1.5% offensive stats, which is the most important thing for a DPS. You do get critical avoidance in there, but in total you're getting 3% versus 7.5%. So I can't rate the set highly at all. Otherwise, for new players, it's very nice because, again, you can go to the new campaign, North Dark Reaches, at any item level up until November the 29th. After that, you will need 50,000 item level. But once you access the zone, you will continually be able to go here, do your grinding, and get your item level artificially boosted to 50,000. That way you can have a decent chance to kill the enemies, and you can go about to do your heroic encounters. Now, the ones you want to be doing are the ones with kind of the fancy outline, not the small ones, these big ones. So Prison Break, Fungal Frenzy, and then you're going to have another one here where you fight a black dragon. Now, of course, you won't be able to do them by yourself, and even on a maxed out character, you're going to struggle a lot to do it by yourself. So you definitely want to wait for some people. Have a look in your zone chat. People will call out plus BHE or BHE in certain instance, and then you might need to jump instance by using this button on the top right of the map there. And again, for new players, this set is really good for just an item level boost. You're gonna get your neck and waist on legendary, no need to upgrade it. That's 1,800 item level per piece. As for the artifact, that's what I'm most interested in. This artifact is going to be one of the 4 best artifacts to have equipped in your secondary slots. Additionally, the artifact has the ability to debuff the enemy, making it so that everybody who attacks that enemy will increase their damage against it. So we're just going to upgrade it here. Don't recommend just using cold motes. You can use preservation wards to protect your glyphs and your enchanting stones, and just use a bunch of refinement points, and then you don't need a mote at all. I'm just on the preview server here, so yeah, let's just make it easy and use those cold motes, which we can get for free here. But now we have our Assassin's Dice. Pretty cool name, but it deals pretty heavy damage in one hit, over 100,000 there, and then it has the ability for 15 seconds to mark the target, and a marked target will take minus 5% crit chance, minus 5% critical avoidance, and minus 5% deflect severity. Let's have a quick look what it looks like in combat, and I believe it's only going to hit one target. You throw the dice at an enemy, damaging it and marking it. So let's go and throw it, and we can see, yeah, 150,000, even more than it says on the tooltip. But then when you attack your target, you should see that your damage will be increased for 15 seconds, which is 5 seconds more than the general other artifact. Now, we need to compare that against artifacts like the Dragonbone Blades, Mythalar, and so on. You can see the majority of artifacts only last 10 seconds. Now, these debuff artifacts are massive. You need them in order to obtain that big burst damage within content. And the more coordinated everybody is, that everybody has a debuff and uses it at once, and then you combine that with your mount powers and daily powers, you gain massive damage, and overall you make a run so much smoother. So let's first go to Underdark and see, does the stats from the set double while within that North Dark, Underdark area. We can have a quick look. We have our crit strike at 77% and we have our critical avoidance at 42%. We should expect to see that going just to over 78%, and we should expect to see our critical avoidance go to 43%. So let's quickly head towards North Dark Reaches and we can check our stats and we can see, yes, indeed it does work. It does double. Our crit strike's gone to 78%. So now it's giving us 3% crit strike and 3% critical avoidance. And let's jump into, let's say, the dungeon, Temple of the Spider. It should be considered Underdark. So we should also see our stats not changing from here within the North Dark. And indeed, our stats have not changed. Still 78% crit strike. So it will work within Temple of the Spider if you so wanted to. Personally, again, there are better sets than it, and you might want to strive towards those. But it's a good stepping stone set. But let's talk more about the artifact and why it's actually a good debuff artifact by reducing the enemy stats. Enemies normally have 0% critical avoidance. That got removed from enemies as critical strike and critical severity are no longer a counter stat. They purely just increase your damage. So reducing the enemy's critical avoidance, you would think would be no damage gain if enemies don't have any critical avoidance. And then reducing the enemy's deflex severity, which is 90%, should increase our damage because our counter stat to deflex severity is accuracy. The more accuracy we have, the less impactful the enemy's deflex severity. Now, going back to the reducing of critical avoidance when they have 0%, it does actually work. You can reduce their critical avoidance to -5%. What that means is you effectively gain 5% more accuracy by reducing the enemy's deflex severity and 5% more critical severity by reducing the enemy's critical avoidance. Both can go over the cap, like critical severity at 95%. Accuracy could also go to 95%, but most people are stuck around 50 to 60% unless you're like somebody with accuracy forte, like a fighter. So with doing that, with these stats, you can see it's like a 4.6% damage gain just with this debuff artifact. If we want to compare that to like Mythallar, you can see, yeah, we're missing out on quite a lot, and it means it's not that effective. Mythallar will give you a 15% when you look at the debuffs, since it's a debuff, so it multiplies separately to like damage buffs. Whereas Assassin's Dice again just multiplies with your stats, it just adds to them basically. However, you want to look at the Mythallar when you have other debuffs, because it's not like it's just going to be you using a debuff. There's going to be other debuffs as well, so the effectiveness will decrease the more debuffs you have. And we can see an example list of in a trial. You would have these 10 artifacts plus these 3 mount combat powers. You would have a fourth, which is the Pegasus, but that's a damage buff. And these are all debuffs. And you can see they add up to like 154%. So if we were to look at the Mythallar and compare that with debuffs between 139 plus 15% from Mythallar to 154, you can see Mythallar is only just over a 6% increase. So that puts it closer to your Assassin's Dice of 4.6, but still missing a bit there. However, you generally would want to run with Mythallar anyway, and when we look at that list again, you can see the least benefiting one is the Sparkling Fey Emblem with just 5%. So why not we compare the Assassin's Dice to that, switch the Sparkling Fey Emblem out, as we can see the comparison makes the Assassin's Dice far better in a trial than your Sparkling Fey Emblem. So yeah, the Assassin's Dice does have a place within trials by replacing that Sparkling Fey Emblem again. There are of course other debuff artifacts like Thirst and the Jewel of the North, those artifacts which move you. And you can see like the list here, and this list does miss the like Dragonbone Blades and also the Black Dragon's Mark, so you would have 2 more in there. But yeah, switch out the Sparkling Fate emblem for the Assassin's Dice within a trial, and everybody would gain a bit more damage, which is great. And if you wanted to, let's say, switch out even a 10% debuff artifact, you can see it is actually worth it. Assassin's Dice will give a little bit more damage than just a 10% damage debuff increase, because you already have so many debuffs. Otherwise, if you're in a dungeon, you only have 5 people, so 5 debuff artifacts plus 2 debuff mounts. That would only be 94%, and then you run into the issue of, yeah, the Assassin's Dice is not as good as a 10% debuff, so not worth switching like your 10% debuff arty for the Assassin's Dice. Not to say that it isn't usable, since that's only a 0.73%. So ultimately, the reason why I say the Assassin's Dice is actually a very good artifact to use as a secondary artifact is because of the amount of offensive stats it gives. You can see it only gives offensive stats. I made a list here. You can see all of those 1200 item level artifacts in this current module, and we first started out getting the Neverwinter Standard, the Jewel of the North, Demogorgon, and you can see all of the rest there, including the Tentacle Rod, which I also want to get my hands on and test. And we can see that there are only 4 artifacts with only offensive stats: Mythallar, Dragonbone Blades, Assassin's Dice, and the Tentacle Rod. The rest all have like some defense statistic. Now, each artifact I've divided up to having 4 different stats, and you'll see that because looking at the Mythallar, it has accuracy, combat advantage, and stamina. Now, you may wonder why it has 2 listings of combat advantage, same with the Tentacle Rod, and same with the Assassin's Dice having 2 power. It's because they basically give double that amount of stat. You can see the Assassin's Dice gives twice as much power as the accuracy, so it's taking up 2 slots. And if we look at the Mythallar, which is a bit special, it has accuracy, then double combat advantage, then stamina, and then combined rating. And it has less combined rating, 960, because of it giving stamina regen instead. And you can see that with the Assassin's Dice, the combined rating is 1020. And what combined rating does is basically add to all of your stats. So if I have 1000 combined rating, I'm gaining 1000 of all of my 15 stats. Yeah, it's pretty massive, and that's why the difference between 1020 and 960 is the equivalent of 900 of a singular rating, because again, 60 by 15 is 900. So again, that's why you have this list, and that's why the Dragonbone Blades, the Assassin's Dice, and the Tentacle Rod are the 3 best artifacts to have on secondary slots, followed by Mythallar as last because it has stamina regen, which means it has a bit less combined rating than those other 3. And so, yeah, it has its place. Of course, you might want to consider having the storybooks, especially for scaled content instead, but those are very expensive and limited to obtain. So right now, Assassin's Dice is definitely one of the best to have as a secondary artifact. You can use it as a primary, but I only recommend it instead of the other debuffs when you're in a trial, instead of one of the 10% debuffs or even the Sparkling Fate emblem, even better. Ultimately, let's make sure that the artifact actually works how it says it does, as Cryptic are notorious for releasing things that are just broken. And so we head over to Chult, we get our base damage by attacking the dummy, then we cast the artifact, and then we get our damage after that. And we had to do some adjusting with our formula here, making it so that, let's say we critically hit 100% of the time, and adjusting it so that our accuracy is 100% of the time, so that when we use our ACT, we can just have a look at the hits that were dodges that did get deflected, so that our accuracy was impacting it. And we can see the damage difference then would be like a 6.54, and getting our base damage and then multiplying the damage that we get after we've cast the dice by that 1.0654, we get the exact value we are getting on our dummies. So the dice works, and it works the way it says it does. That is wonderful. It means, again, it's a very good artifact to use instead of a 10% debuff, and especially a 5% debuff in a trial scenario. For a dungeon, it's just shy of a 10% debuff. Still very well usable if that's the only debuff artifact you have. And otherwise, it's one of the 3 best artifacts to have in your secondary slots. I know I did say 4, but in fact, with the Mythallar fragment giving stamina, which doesn't directly impact damage, you are losing a little bit of combined rating that affects all your stats, including your offense ones, of course, meaning it's not as good compared to Dragonbone Blades, Assassin's Dice, and Tentacle Rod, with just pure offense all the way right through. As similar to the Mythallar, you have your Blue Dragon's Mark, which has crit save, crit strike, and crit strike, but then it also has deflection instead of combined rating. So you could include that if I was to include Mythallar. So I would change my list to this, and those are the 3 best item level artifacts you want to have as secondaries if you don't have the storybooks for scaled content. And even then, the storybooks outside of scaled content aren't too great compared to just higher item levels for more burst damage. So very good to see an artifact that will at least have some use compared to some other junk they've recently been adding. Overall, special thank you to all of these channel members. And if I presented this well, consider leaving the video a like. If you're new around here, consider subscribing. I'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.